as a kid, I was really into Art Nouveau. I just loved illustrations. I loved children's book illustrations, Art Nouveau, and then I guess I segged into Art Deco. I loved Art Deco. I apprenticed with this graphic designer from Switzerland named Paul Deegan. He was really influential to me because he was just so quirky and imaginative. Unfortunately, he's dead now, but he introduced me to a kind of a imaginative world that I don't think I quite grasped at the time. I kind of wanted to keep going in that direction, working out of the imagination and putting interesting things together. He lived up in Volcano, and he actually kind of steered me in the direction of folk art, which was a very strong interest of mine for a long time, like indigenous art. When I was in college, my favorite architecture was indigenous architecture, and so it kind of moved naturally into folk art, which I'm a little bit embarrassed about, but I did a lot of Pennsylvania Dutch kind of knockoffs, and I love that kind of whimsy. And I have a friend, Noe Tanigawa is a woman in the painting down there with the lilies. She's an amazing painter, and she was a huge influence on me. And she did a lot of work in graphic, kind of abstract paintings, and I sort of glommed onto that for a while and started putting that on fabric. And I had this kind of semi-career as a wearable art artist in the 80s when a lot of artists were doing that. And I actually got picked up by the dresser for some of the big entertainers and moved to Los Angeles because I thought I was going to make it big time as a wearable art artist, and that didn't really work out that well. But that was an interesting direction because during doing the film positives and stuff for the garment industry kind of got me back into illustration. And the realism, which I had abandoned, I was just doing abstraction at that time. And the realism kind of lent itself to moving back to Hawaii and kind of like trying to document my roots, more or less. And so I moved to Kalani Honua and did fabric work for Mary Philpotts. And Mary Philpotts, of course, was a huge influence just because she's such a strong director. And she channeled me into directions. And I like working with interior designers sometimes because it's a good practice to work with limitations. So Mary Philpotts, the Kona Village Resort, Kalani. I was living at Kalani doing bedspreads for the Kona Village. And Roger Montoya came to Kalani as a guest artist, and he really blew me away in terms of his ability to capture scenes really fast. Like, he had very strong drawing skills, which I have also, but he was able to use oil paint in a way that was very easy. And he taught me that technique, and so when I do teach classes, I really credit him a lot for kind of like an oil painting made easy technique, which some of my students really love, and others it makes them cry, and some people just really gravitate towards it. But so Roger Montoya was a huge influence on my art. Trying to think. Oh, and currently David Hockney is my big, like, yay, David. Thanks, David. You showed us how to work. A direction to go in. The personal aspect of plein air painting is that it does kind of put you in a state. I think that human beings really need to slow down every so often. It can take a lot of mental monkey talk and like busyness to get yourself into the position of actually being a plein air painter. But then once you're out there, you have all your materials, and you can kind of get in a groove. And it doesn't happen to me every time I paint. I mean, my mentality is chattering away, criticizing, but the goal is to just kind of get into this kind of pure creativity. And I think plein air is a very good means to an end. It's like any other immersive art form, like dance or something. You have to study your technique, and do a lot of laborious stuff, but then at a certain point you're just like in it and that's it, and I think in some way you're expressing a higher power. That's what humans are on the planet for, is to have that experience. I start oftentimes in a really strange color, and so my underpainting will be done in a monochrome, and I like to play with unusual colored monochromes, and then the layers of color go in on top of that. And like actually this big painting down there started this in the same palette, and I just worked it until it was developed. But this one I thought felt fairly complete with this predominant blue. It's an attempt to capture that time of evening when the moon is rising, but the sunlight is still on the clouds overhead. If I could really go back in time, I'd love to go back and paint with the folks. Duran, Matisse, Dufy. It's that combination of fantasy and realism. I find realism that's unalloyed to be a little bit dull. I like to push the colors. I'm not fantastical in my choice of subject, but I do like to kind of push the colors if possible. This was an experiment in working from a small painting. This particular one, I used photographs. I used a photograph for the girl. The underpainting is a transition from pink to purple and then to green. It's a challenge for me to use thick paint. I tend to paint very thin, and to actually build it up is very different for me. Some artists do that so much more and more naturally. It's challenging, but to get a sense of the sunlight coming down and hitting the waves, I had to pretty much build it up to make it sparkle. Portraiture is challenging in general because people can't hold the same position for very long. People get very serious looking, and even the most witty, playful people just look like they're depressed. So it's challenging. So I think doing a self-portrait is a chance to address that and play with the expression. Like, okay, what would it look like if somebody had a silly smirk? These are my neighbors Janet and Crandall. This is my brother Eric, my nephew Evan, another nephew Leif, and this is Zephyr. He's my great nephew. This is Richard Coog, who's a big part of our community down there. He's the guy that started Kalani Onua, and he's just an amazing person. He's a really dear friend. I admire him, and he's totally buff, and he goes swimming every day. He swims for miles, and yeah, he's quite amazing. This is Punaike Onaona Kali'iho Amalu. He died a couple of years ago. He's very, very loved, beautiful singer, and he was kind enough to model for me a number of times. And his sister is the one that actually modeled for the Pele. And I think that it's because she's got those strong Hawaiian features that I won that contest. I did a bunch of paintings of Uncle Robert for the Schaefer Portrait Challenge, and actually the final painting that actually did get into the Schaefer Portrait thing is over at the One Gallery, so it's still around. But I thought for this show, this has not been shown so much. This is one of many sketches I did from life of Uncle. He's a great guy. He's a very strong personality. He's got a beautiful family. He's kind of the royalty of Kaimu Kalapana. His compound is turning into the center of culture down there. So I like this portrait. That's his daughter there, the Lohe, the woman with the child, which I thought was interesting because when the child was young, her hair was quite blondish. This was my Hawaiian language teacher, Lei. It's not quite a portrait, it's sort of a fabulized portrait. I really love Hawaiian decorative art. The tapa is very inspirational to me. They were incredibly inventive, and they used their resources to make extraordinary patterns. I'm very drawn to that. But I love pareos. I sort of feel like it's the indigenous art of Hawaii that a lot of artists have taken up. Sig Zane's taken it to a high level, and every year at Mary Monarch you see some amazing fabric art. I think it's a collectible. I think people should be collecting pareos. This is one that I did with paper stencils. So this was one that Mary Philpotts commissioned for the Kona Village Resort. And I did all these bedspreads. I'm so fascinated by life today. I just think we live in such an interesting time. And it's like people have this apocalyptic sense that, you know, the comets are going to hit and everything. And for a long time I was like, what makes you think this time is so special? Like we're going to have the comet of the, you know, millennia in our lifetimes. And I'm just starting to think, well, this is a really special time. This is like human beings. We're coming to a real peak of culture, I think, in a way that's amazing. I think our civilization is flowering. It's fantastic and it's fascinating. And at the same time, we're so dangerous. Like we're a kind of a primate that has our hands on some really, really dangerous tools right now. We've got way more power than we know how to use. And so art can seem so irrelevant and so kind of useless. And at the same time, it's like, what else is there? Art is one of the highest things that people can do, in a sense, because it's expressing our potential. And I think, you know, sure, as a species, we have technology and we have the ability to really dominate the planet in a kind of an unfortunate way sometimes. But in the arts, it's like, it's a blossom. It's like we're a life form that's just coming into this amazing blossom. I think art is a big part of that. So for my own philosophy, I just feel like the more that I can get into that groove of channeling something or just having my skills be developed to the point where I can think of something and do it, and just do it without a lot of self-judgment, that's really my ideal. Move in that direction.